Book nibbles. Big ideas, small bites. Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed on Not Getting By in America is both a personal journey and a piece of investigative journalism, written at a time of relative economic prosperity in the United States. Published in 2001, it challenges the idea that low-wage work is a stepping stone to stability, security, and the so-called American dream. Ehrenreich, a middle-class writer and journalist, set out on an experiment to see firsthand how people survive when working in low-wage jobs, those positions often described as unskilled and taken for granted in daily life. Her goal was to immerse herself, to live as close to the reality of low-wage workers as possible, taking only entry-level jobs, trying to pay rent and afford food, and experiencing the physical, emotional, and psychological costs of such work. She imposed certain rules on herself. She would not rely on her education or professional connections, she would accept only jobs open to anyone without experience, and she would try to cover her living expenses entirely on her wages. At the same time, she allowed herself a few concessions. She would always have access to a car and would not let herself go hungry in ways that endangered her health. But even with those minimal safety nets, the experiment would reveal just how fragile, exhausting, and often degrading life is for the millions who toil in America's lowest-paying jobs. Her first stop was Key West, Florida, where she sought work as a waitress. The job search itself proved humiliating and draining. Multiple restaurants handed her lengthy, intrusive application forms, often demanding drug tests for positions paying little more than minimum wage. Once she landed a job in a diner-style restaurant, she immediately discovered the punishing demands of waiting tables in a busy tourist town. Customers were rude or dismissive, shifts were long and physically demanding, and the pay was far from sufficient. Even when she worked double shifts, bending over backward to keep customers satisfied, she found herself running numbers at the end of the day, realizing that tips and wages together could not reliably cover the cost of rent in a safe or decent apartment. She eventually tried picking up a second waitressing job, thinking more hours would bring more income, but the physical exhaustion nearly broke her. The relentless pace of carrying trays, smiling through back pain, and fielding impatient customers drained her body and spirit. At one point, she nearly faints from fatigue. What struck her most was not just the low pay, but the casual disrespect aimed at people in these positions. Customers and managers alike treated waitresses as invisible, interchangeable, or simply not worth basic courtesy. She found a small community among her co-workers, most of them women struggling to support children or to juggle multiple jobs. Their resilience impressed her, but it also underscored how unfairly the system was stacked against them. Rent alone swallowed such a high percentage of their pay that saving was impossible. One minor setback, a car breakdown, an illness, a late paycheck, could mean eviction or hunger. She soon moved on to Maine, where she tried her hand at housekeeping. Here she learned another layer of low-wage work's burdens. Working for a cleaning service, she entered the homes of the wealthy, scrubbing toilets, mopping floors, and dusting elaborate furniture for people who often barely acknowledged her presence. The physical demands were crushing. Bending, kneeling, carrying heavy buckets of water, inhaling cleaning chemicals that irritated her skin and lungs. Breaks were rare, and the pace was relentless because clients expected perfect results in minimal time. She noticed the invisibility of house cleaners. To employers, they were ghosts who tidied up messes without being seen. To Ehrenreich, this invisibility was itself a form of dehumanization. She described the strain of cleaning rich people's bathrooms while her own housing situation remained precarious, living in motels or tiny rented rooms that barely fit her needs. The irony was impossible to miss. The people who could most afford to pay, who lived in luxury, outsourced their dirt to women barely scraping by, women who would return home sore, tired, and still struggling to pay their own rent. In Maine, she also took a job as a dietary aide in a nursing home, feeding and caring for elderly patients. The work was emotionally taxing. Residents were often frail, sometimes demanding, sometimes confused, and the job required patience and compassion. Yet the pay was meager and the staff were overworked and understaffed. She saw firsthand how the undervaluation of caregiving labor hurt both workers and those they cared for. Staff had to rush residents through meals, sometimes cutting corners, not because they didn't care, but because there simply weren't enough workers to meet the demand. Ehrenreich grew increasingly aware that low wages did not just harm workers, but also degraded the quality of service in fields essential to society, like elder care. Later, she moved to Minnesota and attempted to find work as a Walmart sales associate. The process of getting hired was itself revealing. She underwent drug testing and orientation sessions that felt more like indoctrination than training, where managers emphasized loyalty, compliance, and the company's supposed family atmosphere. Once on the job, however, she discovered the contradictions between corporate rhetoric and reality. Wages were minimal, schedules unpredictable, and expectations exhausting. The company sought to foster a sense of belonging while simultaneously using every means to extract as much labor as possible for as little pay as possible. Ehrenreich found herself policing shelves, restocking goods, and attending to customers for hours on end, earning a wage that barely covered her daily expenses. Her co-workers were a mix of individuals resigned to long-term low-wage employment and those desperate for something better but unable to find it. She was struck by how Walmart and similar corporations cultivated dependence by keeping wages low and hours inconsistent, ensuring that employees could never comfortably plan their lives or save for the future. Throughout her journey, Ehrenreich continually wrestled with the question of dignity. Again and again she saw how low-wage work not only exhausted bodies but chipped away at spirits. Managers often treated workers with suspicion, monitoring breaks, demanding drug tests, or speaking down to them as if they were children. Customers sometimes sneered, assuming low-wage workers were lazy or unskilled, when in reality they performed jobs most people would find impossible to sustain. Ehrenreich observed that what people in these jobs wanted most beyond better pay was respect, acknowledgement, recognition that their labor mattered. Instead, they were treated as expendable, constantly reminded of their low status. She argued that society's entire system of low-wage labor is built not only on underpayment, but on a hierarchy that ensures those doing essential work are kept invisible and undervalued. Her attempt to live on these wages revealed stark truths about housing in particular. Rent was consistently the largest and most destabilizing expense. In every city she worked, she discovered that affordable housing was almost non-existent near job sites. Workers often had to commute long distances because the places they could afford were far away, or else they lived in substandard conditions: trailer parks, motels, or crowded apartments. She documented how motels charged weekly rates that seemed manageable in the short term but actually drained income faster than monthly rents, trapping people in a cycle where they could never save enough for deposits or better housing. Housing instability, she realized, was one of the key forces keeping workers poor because without stable shelter, everything else, health, employment, family life, fell apart. Another major theme was the hidden costs of being poor. Ehrenreich noticed that many aspects of daily life were more expensive for the poor than for the middle class. Fast food might be the cheapest way to eat when you had no kitchen, but it quickly drained money and health. Renting by the week was more expensive than renting by the month, but without savings, families had no choice. Without health insurance, minor illnesses or injuries could spiral into major crises. Car trouble, an inevitable reality for those driving older vehicles, could erase weeks of income overnight. Poverty imposed a constant tax on the poor, she concluded, a series of premiums they paid simply because they lacked the resources to escape. Ehrenreich also grappled with her own outsider status. She was always aware that she had a safety net, that she could, at any moment, return to her real life, her career, her financial stability. Her co-workers did not have that option. This created moments of guilt and reflection. She felt deep admiration for her colleagues who endured far worse conditions than she did without complaint, while also feeling shame at her own moments of exhaustion or frustration. She was acutely aware that her experiment, however challenging, could never fully replicate the psychological weight of knowing you have no escape. Yet she hoped that by immersing herself in telling these stories, she could shed light on realities that many middle and upper-class Americans preferred to ignore. The book is filled with anecdotes that highlight both resilience and despair. One coworker she befriended juggled multiple jobs while still relying on food pantries to feed her children. Another recounted moving from apartment to apartment, never able to settle because wages could not keep up with rent. She met workers who proudly showed off their efficiency or skills, despite being paid little more than minimum wage, people who found dignity in their labor even when society offered none. And she encountered others worn down whose bodies bore the marks of years in hard labor: bad backs, swollen feet, chronic pain, that went untreated because health care was out of reach. As Ehrenreich concluded her experiment, she reflected on the larger meaning of what she had witnessed. The idea that low-wage jobs are simply stepping stones, that anyone can make it if they try, rang hollow against the evidence of constant struggle. She argued that the real barrier was not a lack of effort but a system structured to keep wages low and opportunities limited. Employers benefited from an abundant supply of desperate workers, while workers had little power to demand more. She pointed out that unions, once a force for protecting low-wage workers, had been weakened, leaving employees largely at the mercy of corporate interests. The social safety net, meanwhile, was threadbare, offering little cushion against the realities of eviction, illness, or unemployment. Her conclusions were damning but necessary. Low-wage workers were not invisible, she insisted. They were everywhere, serving meals, cleaning homes, stocking shelves, caring for children and the elderly. Without them, daily life would grind to a halt. Yet society chose to ignore their struggles, to dismiss them as unskilled or undeserving while profiting from their labor. She argued for a re-evaluation of what these jobs are worth and called for policies that would make work truly a path out of poverty. Higher minimum wages, affordable housing, universal health care, and stronger protections for workers. Most of all, she argued for dignity, for recognizing the humanity of those who toil in the lowest rungs of the labor market. By the end of Nickel and Dimed, readers are left with a portrait not only of poverty but of endurance, invisibility, and systemic exploitation. Ehrenreich's vivid storytelling and sharp analysis combine to show how millions of Americans live in constant precarity, working tirelessly yet never able to get ahead. She dismantles the myth that low-wage work is easy or unimportant, demonstrating instead that it is backbreaking, essential, and woefully undercompensated. Her experiment, though temporary, shines a light on realities that are permanent for countless others, demanding readers confront uncomfortable truths about the hidden labor that sustains the nation. And that's it. Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.